Hello everybody, you're welcome back again to the Reggae Appreciation Society. If you were to ask any musician, tours and live shows are the lifeblood of any artist's career. Traveling the globe and putting in electrifying performances in front of die-hard fans is always a pleasure. But sometimes these tours are not always pleasant and sometimes descend into nightmares. One of the most striking examples of this was the Reggae Africa Splash tour of 1988, an extravaganza that was designed to take Jamaica's finest on a whirlwind tour of the continent. But despite these great plans and ideas, that tour would descend from a glorious homecoming for the artists to a desperate scramble for survival, and saw global superstars like Yellowman and Judy Mowatt all needing to escape in the middle of the night and flee hundreds of miles to save their skins. And when it seemed like there was no way out, a guardian angel would appear in the form of Nigerian music legend Fela Kuti, a musician whose street credibility was so immense that he commanded almost godlike reverence from every street thug and gangster in that African country. But what was the story? Let's take a look at how Fela Kuti saved U-Roy, Burning Spear, Yellowman and others from a mob of gangsters in Nigeria in 1988. So this Reggae African Sun Splash tour was a brainchild of Don Taylor and Danny Sims, two men who at different times had been Bob Marley's manager. They had hatched this idea and had found a promoter called Keith Wilson, and Wilson was to be in charge of all the logistics on the continent. The organizers had big plans for the festival and were determined to make it happen. They knew that there was only one man who could get all the artists together and coordinate a successful tour, and that man was none other than legendary artist manager and tour logistics guru in the great Copeland Forbes. So Don Taylor and Danny Sims sold the idea to Forbes and gave him the task of getting Jamaica's finest on board. Copeland Forbes would use his rapport and massive goodwill to secure the presence of Yellowman, Burning Spear, U-Roy, Judy Mowatt, Freddie McGregor, Sly and Robbie, and reggae band Chalice. And he also secured the participation of two of Nigeria's biggest stars in the persons of Island Records artist King Sunny Ade and Afrobeat legend Fela Kuti. And Forbes also put together an elite technical crew with popular promoter and producer Tommy Cowan to act as the festival's official MC. It was scheduled to be a humongous event, and the contingent was so large that Jamaica's Ministry of Health found out about it and donated 10,000 condoms, as the authorities didn't want that number of people to catch anything abroad and bring it back to the island with them. The crew took off to Africa, and the festival kicked off with great shows in the countries of Liberia and the Congo. The next stop was Lagos, Nigeria, the home of Fela Kuti. On the flight to Lagos from Congo, Fela Kuti made his presence felt when he whipped out a huge spliff that was the size of a deodorant spray can and started smoking it right there in the plane that was flying at 37,000 feet. He would hand out several similar sized joints to the members of the crew, and in a few minutes that cabin was filled with herb smoke and a very stoned cabin crew. When he landed, an omen of what was to come reared its head at the Lagos airport. As they were all walking out of the terminal, Judy Mowatt slipped and fell, and Copeland Forbes dropped his bag and rushed over to help her get up. And before he knew it, someone stole his bag and slipped away. But despite that loss, the crew settled in pretty well and put in spectacular shows for 2 nights at the humongous Tafawa Balewa Square, a huge venue that was filled to the brim with fans who were eager to see their idols in the flesh. And in that show, Yellowman and U-Roy were the standout performers and drove the audience wild with excitement. Their next and last show in Nigeria was to be a concert in the ancient city of Benin, about 5 hours away from Lagos, before they would continue on to Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana and other countries on the tour. They travelled in a convoy of buses to Benin and arrived in the city in the evening. And when they got there, they were introduced to the local organizing committee that was led by a man popularly called Mr. T, due to its resemblance to the popular American actor. This Mr. T was also a legendary street thug that commanded a massive street gang in the city. The crew would settle into their rooms and got some rest before the concert that was taking place the next day. So the next morning, all was set for a sizzling show to end the Nigerian leg of that tour. But there was a problem. The artists and crew hadn't been paid the balance of their agreed fees, and the technical crew in particular were threatening to down tools and not play that evening's show. Copeland Forbes called the promoter and told him what was going on and was trying to convince the crew when Mr. T and over 30 thugs stormed the hotel with sticks and metal rods. and told Copeland Forbes point blank that either they played the show or the artists wouldn't leave Benin in one piece. Seeing that they were in a tight spot, the crew agreed to play the show and fight for their money after, and they headed over to the venue that was the largest stadium in Benin, and they once again put in a spectacular show that had the massive crowd ecstatic. And when it was all over, Fela Kuti and Sonny Ade left for Lagos that morning in their own cars, while Copeland Forbes and the other artists would head back to their hotel for some well-deserved rest. The next morning, the artists and crew had breakfast and packed their luggage set to leave, when Mr. T and his gang stormed the hotel looking for the promoter. And when Copeland Forbes told Mr. T that he had no idea where he was, Mr. T told him that he and his boys hadn't been paid for the security work the night before. And it got worse, as he told Forbes straight up that until he got paid, none of the artists could leave Benin. In simple terms, they were now his hostages. Copeland Forbes began to work the phones and tried frantically to get in touch with the promoter while doing his best to keep his crew calm, when a military vehicle drove into the hotel parking lot and several policemen and soldiers jumped off, and a civilian that looked like Tommy Kawan being marched into the hotel at gunpoint. Apparently, Tommy Kawan had managed to slip away from the hotel and hired a taxi to take him back to Lagos. But unfortunately for Tommy, his car was stopped at a roadblock manned by soldiers and some policemen who had been part of the concert security team at the stadium the night before. It just happened they also hadn't been paid, and they immediately recognized Tommy. They arrested him on the spot and drove him back to the hotel. By that evening, the promoter still couldn't be reached, and Mr. T with his thugs were getting more aggressive with each passing hour. It was becoming more dangerous, and Copeland Forbes was forced to come up with a plan and exit strategy. He got the drivers of their buses to go and sit in their vehicles and wait on standby, and he told all the artists to get their belongings and go through the back doors of the hotel one by one and go wait in the bus, while he kept Mr. T and his boys busy in the hotel lobby with some drinks. That hotel was on a hilltop, so they would all join hands to push the buses down the hills without starting the engines and alerting Mr. T and his gang. At about 3 in the morning, Copeland Forbes casually slipped away and joined the crew in the car park. They pushed the buses and jumped in as they began to roll down the hill and slipped away into the darkness. They had made a daring escape and found their way to Lagos 5 hours later, and the crew traced the promoter to the luxurious hotel room where he was chilling and confronted him angrily for the ordeal that he put them through. That evening, they were still deliberating with the promoter, and Forbes was worried about the equipment which they had left in Benin, when they all began to hear commotion that was going on downstairs, as several trucks rolled into the hotel parking lot, all loaded with their equipment, plus the terrifying sights of Mr. T and his gang. Copeland Forbes knew that the game was up, but he had one last joker to play. He ran to the phone and called Fela Kuti's house and begged the singer to come over quickly and save their skins. While Mr. T and his crew were combing the hotel looking for them, Fela Kuti and about 20 of his boys showed up at the hotel and calmed everybody down in a matter of seconds. At the mere sight of Fela, Mr. T and his boys couldn't say a word and instead ran over to cheer him with the hero's welcome. Fela ushered Mr. T and Copeland Forbes into the promoter's room that was a presidential suite and oversaw a peace meeting. He made it clear that all the blame was to go to Keith Wilson, the promoter, and laid down the law that no one was to touch the Jamaican artists for any reason. He forced Keith Wilson to pay Mr. T on the spot, and once they had their cash, they headed back to Benin without cracking any skulls, to the incredible relief of all the artists and crew. So Fela Kuti saved the day, and he would invite the entire crew over to his club called the African Shrine and show them all a great time before they packed their bags and flew back to Miami and onwards to Jamaica. The tour had been aborted and cancelled due to all the chaos, and the artists were all happy and glad to be back home, enormously relieved at having survived what had been a harrowing experience and hazardous trip. And truly, everything could have gotten even worse if not for the quick thinking of Copeland Forbes and the unreal legendary street cred of the great Fela Kuti. So there you have it. Thank you for watching this video today. Please leave a like, subscribe, and until next time, God bless.